And that night, midnight, they were shutting everything down.
Oh,
No restaurants, nothing would be open.
geez.
And now, and the server said to us, he said, well, I said, as of midnight, he says, I'm out of a job and I don't have any money.
Ugh.
So that was, I mean, when you think of this, we haven't even hit the month mark yet. This is how crazy it is.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
the 2 month mark, sorry. It's ridiculous.
Right.
But, excuse me.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, I just got back out of New Zealand, and I think like a week later they just like shut everything down.
Hold
I'm
on.
like, oh my God, I'm so lucky.
Well, we're still fortunate here in that, I mean, we live in a condo, and I'm looking down below to the water here. We can still go out and practice the safe distance and so on,
Right.
but at least we can get out there and go for a walk.
Yeah.
My children are in South Africa, in Cape Town, and they can't go out. They're locked down completely.
Oh, wow.
Not allowed out.
So I have it streaming to YouTube right now, and I put the live feed link in the chat. So if you guys,
grab that too.
Yeah, it wasn't working last time, but I got it to work. So it's up and going.
I just shared the Zoom link.
Yeah, that works too. But yay, now we got it on YouTube live. That's exciting. Okay.
It is, yeah.
You got questions coming in already.
Yes, good. Dirk will handle the questions. Yay. And then let me post that link over to some Facebook, and then we will get started.
All right.
It's quite amazing when you think of the with this pandemic going on, they were actually able to, quote, function.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine this 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago.
I was thinking about how communication has enhanced our response to this. Because if you put us back, 40 to 60 years in a time before the internet, as well as just slower general international communication, it would have spread much quicker.
Yeah. Totally.
But we responded relatively quickly. Some places could have been faster than others. And obviously every little localized area is going to be hit and impact differently by it. But I was just trying to think early 1900s Spanish flu times where how do you get information about stuff like this outside of word of mouth? And you don't really want word of mouth back then.
No.
All right. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Great. It is 12 o'clock. And if you guys are ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, let's.
All right. Hi, and welcome to our second Hangout for Rotolight. And we have an exciting lineup today. Wow, this is great, you guys. I'm so happy all of you on here. We've, in fact, let's introduce you everybody. I'm Pamela Bloom. I've been in the film industry for, over 20 years now. And now I find myself on the manufacturing side, which is exciting because I geek out on technology and new technology. So this is great. And then I've got my colleague, Dirk. Dirk, introduce yourself.
Yes, well, most of you already know me. I've been on the manufacturing side since forever. And at this time, it was my pick of people I think are important in our industry and are doing awesome things. So thank you, Phil, George, and Denson for joining us tonight. Please introduce yourself.
Go ahead.
My name's Phil Holland.
Phil.
I'm a director and cinematographer. Oh, sorry, I'm on the top row, so I just figured that was I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I kind of film anywhere that I need to go, and I do narrative work, I do commercial work, I do aerial cinematography, I do all sorts of stuff, but definitely a lot of VFX related things and so on. And I think Dirk knows I do a fair bit of equipment testing and stuff for use on larger productions and things like that. So will be an interesting conversation about light today.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Denson.
Yeah, I'm Denson Baker. I'm a cinematographer. I'm currently in London, but travel with work wherever the work takes me, and it's had me end up in London right now. But and I don't know for how much longer. But I shoot feature films and TV series, drama, yeah. So most recently, I was on a Sky TV series shooting in Italy, a ancient Rome story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and yeah, that's me.
And finally, George, it's a pleasure to have you on here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Coles Notes version, I grew up in South Africa, and I spent my formative years in the first advertising agency after art school, and then went to into the film industry. And I lived there until about 1986, and I was part of the South African Society, and then came across to Canada, where I'm now president of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers. And most of my I'd say last 12, 15 years have been really related to teaching, to try to get the newer, younger, current, trendy generation into a new way of thinking, which is not to exclude the old way of thinking. But I think things are changing so much and so dramatically. The technologies are astounding. And when I teach at the university, I often find that I have to get back to the roots and try to go old school again, just to inject a little bit of I guess, logic and basics into it. So that's where the main thrust of what I do is at the moment.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because teaching and education, I think, are the fundamentals of what we do as filmmakers, especially with the new generation coming up. I feel fortunate that I started on film, and I'm glad I was in there, editing film and in there and whatnot, because I love that I had that background. And now these new filmmakers coming in and giving, our background and your background of where you came up with in the film industry is so valuable to have that in our society, in our world, especially like you said, with the industry changing so much and so rapidly. It used to be like, okay, check the gate, done. Now it's just, wow, we've got, with the lighting changing and the monitors and, the cameras constantly evolving. It's fantastic to have, the 20 plus years experience, and then the new guys coming in with these fresh ideas and merging that together. It's actually a really exciting time. And Phil and Denson, I wanted to ask you and have you share some of your experiences, speaking of new technology, with the Titan and what you have come to know about it in the last few weeks. So Phil, Denson, go ahead, show us your experiences with what you've seen.
I'll let you go first, Denson.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a fan. I've really enjoyed having a play with the Titan, and it's such a great tool that just opens up so many opportunities which are achievable often with other types of technology. But what the Titan has shown me is that you can do a lot of those things very quickly and have a lot of control and not needed to have as many expendables, not be purchasing as many different gels, for example, but just be able to work very quick. And that has become something which I've been finding is more and more so important with the work that I've been doing, is just working fast and just finding ways that don't look like you've had to rush or don't look like you've been working fast, and still keep that quality that you have with being given as much time as you would like. So for me, it's about being really well prepared, having some good time with testing. And that's what I've had a chance to do with the Titan next to, is just have a little bit of a play and find some colors that I like and set some presets, and you can have a bit of a palette that I can put together before a production and then know what that palette's going to be, and just very quickly make some of those decisions as to what scene and what look should have what settings. And if there needs to be a little tweak that happens along the way, then that's very quick and easy to do.
How has your journey been into the LED world? I know it's kind of changed over the last few years, and what's your experience been like?
Yeah, well, I've loved it. I mean, for me, the first thing that sort of started to appeal was just lighter and smaller equipment, less power consumption, which was, a draw card. But then now just to be able to have such good quality of light as well is something that's quite interesting. Because at first it was, some of the LEDs that we're seeing, the color was a bit of a problem, and you wouldn't have so much, you'd have some color cast in there, a bit of green or magenta. But I think now there's just so much control and so much perfection. You're almost getting to have some of those grading tools that you have in post, you can now do on set, where you can just control those little little nuances of color and contrast and softness. So I mean, I loved it. I've embraced it and do a lot of work with it. I mean, I still believe you got to use the right tool for the right job. So it's not the answer to all lighting units or to all lighting situations, but there's a lot of situations now where it is the right tool, and it's such a great choice.
Phil, how about you?
Yeah, Dirk's known me for a little bit, and I was a really, really, really early adopter to LED technology back when it was not very good, honestly. And I still have some. They might be 20 plus years old now. I mean, they're quite green. It was, you know, generation 1 LED tech. But, you know, I was curious about it because, you know, tools evolve as technology evolves and people refine things. And I got really excited about the potential, but I mean, for probably I started working in the industry in the 90s, and probably for the first like 10 to 15 years that LEDs were even available, they were virtually a no-go on feature film sets. We did lots of tests, and maybe they were being used for practical set lighting for, you know, maybe inside of interior of a spaceship or something like that. But beyond that, they were very, very shunned upon for like key lighting and fill light. And I think one of the better technology stories in our industry from the last decade has been the wide use and acceptance of quality LED technology on set. And now we've expanded into the realm of multicolor. And what does it mean to do multicolor LED lighting well? And in the case of the Titan, you know, you're looking at something that has an RGB WW, which conservatively is one of the better ways to generate a decent white point and provide confident color. So you can generate a nice skin tone and not have any real concerns about it. Having maybe some sort of near neutral or something that will throw off what you expect. So you know, I'm looking at things like that, and I think some of the surprising features of the light. I started off actually gripping and gaffing when I was very young. So, you know, first and foremost, I appreciate having handles on the light to be able to pick it up and do things with it. That's something that a lot of people just kind of ignore, but like at the end of the day, somebody has to probably get up on a lift or something and put this thing somewhere. In my case, I just have it on a little combo stand back here. But then from there, I look for the features and how do we connect to it? What type of control do we have on it? And I think, you know, a lot of RGB is definitely being exploited now because especially in the digital cinema era, the cameras can now pick up the color very well without pushing things too far out of gamut. So people are exploring these color palettes that we really haven't seen in cinema before. Like, you know, you look at certain films where like they're putting deep reds and deep purples and blues, and you're like, whoa, that's the first time I've seen stuff like that. And that's kind of cool. You know, like if you can use it to enhance the story, that's fun. Most of the time for me, it's about creating a light I'm looking for and then dialing it from there, much like I would with anything else. But now I have all the control on one unit instead of building filter sandwiches and so on and so forth. So I have a lot of control, which I appreciate. And then, you know, I think I have it in CCT, but the HSI I think is really useful here. But probably the thing I've been tinkering the most with is the SmartSoft diffusion. That's pretty interesting. For everybody watching, like what's really interesting about these panel lights, the Titan's got a lot of power. It's got a huge amount of output, but there's I'm going to use the term dimmable, but I mean tunable diffusion electronically on the light. And what you can do is basically dial its transparency and opaqueness. And that's very interesting because now you have the ability to soften the light fairly close to the source, which can change the quality of light in terms of its output. Now, for me, where this gets really interesting is combining other diffusion in front of it and dialing it further. And if anyone has ever done a book light or have explored things like soft boxes, and putting like 2 diffusion panels in some sort of bounce or receiving sort of pattern. This is getting kind of fun, because sometimes you can push the raw output and turn the transparency fully translucent and just have the output of the light if you just need to have a banging quantity of light shooting into a silk. But then you can actually tune and craft it a little bit by dialing it, and this is new technology, honestly. So I'm actually tinkering with it to figure out where and how I can use that more often, instead of just like leaving it at full bore on soft all the time. And just to expand on that, one of the interesting things with these panel style lights, weird one for me, because I am definitely a fan of a harder light. So being able to basically remove that or tune it from the get-go is extremely cool to me, because it assists with the output, but also, I don't want to get too technical, but sometimes where good skin tones comes from is hitting the skin, even with a soft light, is you want a certain intensity to get the subsurface scattering to generate some of that iridescent glow that's very pleasing. And a lot of people don't really understand that when you're barely having enough light to light a scene, but this allows you to kind of craft that sort of skin tone if you're really into that look. So it's been fun. It's not a pocketable light. You can't just throw it in your back pocket, but
well, perhaps if you have a really big backpack, but that's pretty much it,
yeah.
Hey, I've seen Dirk do that.
Oh yeah, I carried that thing in like a back soft case all over the freaking globe. It's it was pretty amazing.
What excites me is, when a lot of us first got into film, we were on film cameras and we were getting that massive dynamic range, but we didn't have the rest of the technology to take advantage of it. And then of course we went digital, and then the dynamic range was this, but then, the lighting and the monitors started expanding. And so now that the cameras are catching up, the monitors catching up, and the lights are coming in, and it's exciting to see all the technology start to come together, which means we can sculpt the light, and we can sculpt and use that to further the story about it. And having, technology like this with the smart soft and the colors and being able to do that it's been amazing being on set and seeing that excitement come alive with the DPs and the gaffers, and their minds start spinning like, wait, I can do this. Wait, I can do this. And I can do this. And that's one of my favorite aspects of this technology emerging. And speaking of this technology, I want to kind of go and talk about a little bit of basic understanding of light and how it's evolved. And George, with your background, and I'm so excited that you're on this, could you give us a little bit of a background of understanding light?
I think for me the biggest challenge I kind of generalize here. If I have a class of students, whether it's a CSC workshop that we're running, or which is more hands-on, or whether it's something at university where you have 38 students and you have to allow them to understand the basic premises and the disciplines of what it is we're trying to do. And bearing in mind, when I do these courses in university, I will have all the wannabe cinematographers, editors, screenwriters. It's across the board. And so that becomes more difficult because you try to compare apples to oranges. But what I try to do right from the get-go is try to make them understand this is not about technology. There is a plethora of an amazing technology out there. It's incredible. This Titan alone is just spectacular in what it can do, but it too has limitations. So while the class wants to just get their hands on the equipment and let's light something, my task or my challenge is to allow them to understand what it is they're visualizing. For me, the visualization, the imagination, the interpretiveness is the key to all of these doors, because if you don't observe those basic protocols, it's like you're just throwing darts at a board without selecting what number you want. Something will stick. But I think sometimes and too often that technology is trying to guide the creativity. I like to say, well, let's think of the creativity first, then use the technologies to allow us to see the technology, to see the imagery in work using this particular light or that light, whatever you are visualizing. I teach with the vice president, Carlos Estevez, and we do our workshops together, and we're both on the same wavelength all the time, no matter what. In fact, recently we decided to just pull a bit of a fast one on the groups, and we said, all right, our general premise is that we break them off into 4 groups, and they can choose an area within the space, and use your imagination, decide on something very specific but very controllable, and let's see what you do. Before they put the monitor up and put the camera up, and now we say, no camera, no monitor, let's see what you're going to do. And so they have to think, they have to pre-visualize what it is that they intend to shoot in the end, which they do. And it's been an amazing learning curve, because all of a sudden they tend to ignore the technology, and we say, look at the background, use your, the classic frame, whatever you want to do, and try to confine your thinking to the image that you want to create. When you get that thinking going, everything else seems to plug into the equation. If you start by putting up the big fancy monitor and bringing some lights in and then put the camera, but don't have a path, a game plan, I think that's when you shortchange yourself. And I think that's a mistake that it's so easy to ignore that. And I think we have to be very vigilant in that we try to always push that forward thinking about being creative and visualizing the image before you actually get to shoot it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Denson.
Yeah.
As you come up and how did you start grasping your understanding of light?
Yeah, I mean, just hearing what George was saying just rings so true for me. I mean, when I started out, like I went to an art school in Australia, and our lighting kit was 3 redheads and a blondie, which I don't even know if they exist anymore. I don't know if anyone's using them anymore, except to maybe light the back of the truck to see at night to get the gear in. But I think just the thing that I learned is if you can do nice lighting with 3 redheads and a blondie, this just takes you even further. But just, it is all about principles of light. It's about qualities of light, and the things that you can create with light you're often wanting to replicate what's happening in nature. And that light it's hard if it's coming through a window, or if it's soft if it's bouncing off a wall, or if it's a lamp, if it's a firelight, if it's a candle. Like, you're wanting to replicate that look of what light does in nature. And so for me, that was the first thing, was just and I love what George was saying, like looking with your eye before you look with a camera. And I think that is so crucial, because I mean, for me, I think it's a practice that a lot of DPs will do, even if they're doing it unconsciously, is just looking at light on a daily basis, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's when they've got a candle-lit dinner, or whether they're at a concert. Just looking at how that light looks, seeing what you like and what you don't, and then thinking, how can I replicate that in a scene, and what can I do to create that look? And often it's not using exactly as what is there in front of you, because often that light, which looks beautiful to your eye, isn't necessarily going to photograph that well, or it's not going to work for a whole scene or look great from all angles. So I think for me, it is just that discipline of just looking with my eye and thinking with my eye, and thinking about what we do with light to get that quality, that atmosphere, that aesthetic.
Absolutely. And Phil, with your VFX background, lighting has definitely changed the way you've done things and whatnot. How's your journey been as you came to understand light and knowing, the VFX aspect of that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because on several levels I have that side of me, but I'm also sort of a brass tack cinematographer. So I'm one of those people who can draw, and I've been studying painting and drawing my whole life. And to George's point, that pre-visualization stage is really, really exciting, because you really often are most exploring how an image might make you feel and what your response is. And then after that, you can figure out how to utilize the tools to get you there. And, you know, I think early on when I was very young, I did so many tests and experiments. This is before any social media or anything like that, but I would shoot myself. I would set up different lights. I would bounce Fresnels off of stuff. I would shoot through different materials just to explore the different qualities, different exposure methods, different colors, everything you possibly could imagine for quite some time. And then you know, I was kind of thrust into the world of feature film production. So the bar was quite high in terms of producing a very high quality image, but also a high quality image that services the story. So in my world, what was sometimes occurring is you would have a plate that would be photographed, like a background plate that would be photographed like in the middle of nowhere north of Vancouver. And then we'd have to do some sort of green screen situation, maybe back in LA or somewhere, blue screen. And then you would have to come up with a lighting scenario that would composite and look natural to the scene, which could be, you know, thousands of miles away. And, you know, that sort of that familiarity and what you want to do, you want to make something that feels natural to the scene. And I think, especially with younger filmmakers who are really just trying to pull a good key on a green or a blue screen, right? Like they don't really care how something might look in terms of the element that they're going to put, whether it's subject or a car or whatever. But the reality is you have to learn to see and understand what's going on in a frame. In the VFX world, if anyone's ever seen any BTS, we shoot these reference balls or we use these HDR cameras, which give us a great deal of information about the scene lighting. In a sphere, specifically a matte gray sphere, as well as a chrome sphere, will tell you a lot about lighting. But George might get a kick out of this, and maybe Denson too. Do you guys know what my most used tool on set is when it comes to lighting?
Tell us.
My
Light
hand.
meter? Oh, your
No,
hand.
my-
Yeah.
So I'll make, you see what I'm doing with my hand, right? With
Yeah.
the thumb right there?
Looking
So
at
this
the
allows
light,
me
it's-
to walk around and discern the quality of light. So if I'm able to see some hard shadows, you'll see me opening it up. And
Mm.
I can discern if I need to soften things down because my hand's got a lot of shapely characteristics. And depending on what I'm filming or who I'm filming, like if I'm filming someone with a flatter nose, I might be able to get away with a little bit of a harder lighting situation than someone maybe with a more pronounced rigid nose or something like that. And it's just those little things. You just start thinking about things and visualizing things differently and tuning things differently and setting yourself up for success. And I love doing that. I love imagining scenarios, and I'm really someone who's not, I mean, there's a lot of very common lighting setups that we use across the industry, but there's also so much we can do with light to carve out shape and form.
So no more
that-
fanning for fire anymore.
I mean, I like using the newer technology to make fire effects and stuff,
Yeah.
but most of the time I've tried to do that, I've used fire.
Yeah.
So,
It's way more fun, you know.
yeah. Yeah.
So, George, how would you, I mean, you kind of explained earlier, merging, you know, the vision with the technology. What is one of the things that you would tell young filmmakers to learn first about lighting? I mean, obviously vision is one of them. You have to have your vision. But what would be the next step of their journey into understanding and really getting their knowledge base solid on lighting?
I try to draw analogies wherever I can that are in tandem with what our job category of cinematography, excuse me. And one of the things I use is cooking. I'm not a cook, I'm not a chef. But the analogy I use is, let's say that you're inviting somebody to a dinner party and they accept, and you just put something together without thinking. It's never really going to be tasteful. It's not going to be what other people think they're going to get, because you haven't taken the time to do a little bit of research about what goes with what and what doesn't go with something else. And do you want to make a pasta dish? What do I have to order? I call it the shopping list. So if one takes a shopping list in a generic form and you apply it to, in our case, lighting, I marry that with something I learned a long time ago from actually a Dutch professor that I had in art school. And he taught me about Goethe. Goethe was a very, very famous physicist, poet, and what have you. And he developed color theories. And the way I try to explain this to students is I use the colloquial expressions, green with envy, red with anger, once in a blue moon, and so on. Or what is the context of that? It becomes a knowledge base that if I'm looking at, let's say, a moonlight scene, whether it's interior or exterior, what are the things that I conjure up in my mind visually? Is it going to be a blue moon? Well, not necessarily, because you get so many different kinds and colors of moons. But my thinking is it puts me into a certain area of the thought process, which dictates I'm not going to use red gels. I'm not going to use green gels. I'm going to go to the cooler colors. Or if it's a Harvest Moon commercial, which is what I grew up with as commercials, I try to narrow my thinking down. And I always refer to works by Vittorio Storaro as the master of color in our industry, in my opinion, because he doesn't just throw lights on a set. He defines his vision. And when he uses colors, it speaks very directly and specifically. Dick Tracy is one of them. Last Emperor is another one. And when you see these movies, you're able to understand what his philosophies are. But then I go completely counter to that, and I go to black and white movies of the 30s, 40s, 50s. And for me, those are one of the most important learning curves for students, because it takes away everything to do with color, and you have to create the mood and whatever else is part of that movie, the process, in black and white. And so that becomes very difficult to do. And I encourage them to forget about all the lighting, forget about everything you can possibly imagine, and look at the old black and white movies. Go to the masters. These are classic statements from everybody. But filmmakers will go and spend hours in art galleries and look at what artists have managed to do, what they managed to light with pigment, which is extraordinary. Right. And if you just pay some attention to that, and again, just nipping back to Holland for a second, anybody who's ever stood in front of the night watch, it is impossible to imagine how you could even replicate that in lighting today without knowledge. How did they do that with pigment? So this is a long roundabout way of saying you have to understand the vision first, how you would apply it, and look at the various lighting techniques that people use. And I was in Italy at the Italian Society, and I'd had a walk around their backlot with Luciano Tavoli. And it was amazing because he took us to these sets that they had there, the Roman sets and all those, and the antiquities. And I just stood gobsmacked. And the first thing I did was I had to use my imagination and say, if I was shooting this tomorrow, where would I put lights? What lights would I use? And even after all these years of experience, you're forced into a very narrow way of thinking, because from that thinking process is going to result the imagery that you are trying to imagine. I think imagine is a huge word in the vocabulary of a cinematographer.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up color theory. You know, we're so used to how audio and sound create the mood and help further the mood of what we're doing in filmmaking, but the lighting hasn't quite got to that point as far as education goes. We have so much education on what audio and mooding and stuff like that, but how do you incorporate lighting your set for that mood? You know, like cooler temperatures with there's going to be some disconnect, or, you know, like the evil person coming in and warmer temperatures. It's like the happy and light. How are you incorporating that sort of lighting into your sets over the years?
I think without going into the technologies, because as these gents have said, that everything has changed so dramatically. We had very few lights to work with when I started, and they were the go-to lights. They were the blondes and the redheads and the scoops and the soft lights and the mini brutes and all that kind. But they were very specific, very defined, and that is what we built our creativity around, because that's all we had. But having said that, we also started to reinvent things or invent things. One of the things in all the product work I did was we shot ice cream. And ice cream even those days, even with a low ISO, it's just the ice cream would melt. So we made what we called an ice cream light, which was nothing more than a bunch of 4-foot tubes, fluorescent tubes, took the ballasts up, put them in a box, and then made this great big floating softbox. The problem was, because it was a green spike, and we really didn't know all about that stuff, then KinoFlow wasn't around. It was just, we wanted this soft wrapping light. But we had to then correct it with a pink gel, so to speak, and the clients just could not understand it because their ice cream was lit by this pink gel. And we would explain to them with the little technology that it would be fine. This was just our color, and they couldn't buy it. So we had to kind of scrap that a bit because we never had the color correction tools that we have today. I'm going back 40 years. So you did what you could do with what you had to do it with. And I always reference a couple of movies. One of them is A Time to Kill, where you have to feel, you have to feel the heat down south in Mississippi and all those places in the height of summer where you're perspiring and you're sweating and you're in a studio that's maybe being cooled down. Well, how do you get that idea across? How do you, there's so many scenes in that movie that I keep on referencing. The whole idea is to interpret what it is you're trying to say using the light, and it's the bit of spritz on the face, which, oh, okay, they're kind of sweaty, and so on. You build it up piece by piece and gradually until you believe that you're achieving what it is you want people to believe. If they believe it, you've done your job. If they say, well, it's hot and sweaty and sticky here and it's 400 degrees, but why are people looking cold and cool? You haven't done your job. So that's the basics of my approach to this kind of theory and this philosophy, you know?
Right.
Bill, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, not dissimilar really. You know, I'll study painting and older painters and older cinematographers and see what their journeys have been. And it is about creating a convincing mood and tone. And to echo some of those sentiments, you know, for me, it's all about discerning tonality and contrast levels. And what I mean about that is you have your sort of black and white tonality, but also your color contrast. And, you know, in nature, we're presented a lot of different color schemes in terms of complementary, triadic schemes and things like that. But the sort of interesting tropes are having, you know, a warm and cool juxtaposition, but also on the frame in terms of simplifying the frame in terms of just tonality. You know, your eye is naturally attracted to the brightest and darkest area on the screen where those areas meet. That's just what humans do because we're mammals, and that's just what it does. But then how do you use these tools to tell a story? And I think that's where it gets really exciting in terms of the minutia that you can explore, and you have to really feel it. You know, it also comes in the form of saturation too. It's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but usually if you have like a saturated highlight, you'll have a desaturated shadow or vice versa, instead of just like a flat level of saturation. Like the camera I'm using right now, if I was actually color grading this for film, there's no chance the highlights would be as saturated as this because it's not how my eye perceives this environment. But you know, that's how I want people to see and feel the story. I think some of the interesting things that a lot of cinematographers did early on, especially with moonlight. Moonlight's actually something you completely can white balance to. It's basically just the sun reflected. If you do like a long exposure, you know, that's one of those things. But just to get to George's point, if you want to feel it, the sort of warm, cool juxtaposition of a warmer skin tone under a cool light is, generally speaking, how we experience an evening's night light hitting us. And, you know, looking at cinematographers across generations, right, we've seen some crazy blues used for moonlight sometimes, especially in television. It was just like, wow, if the moonlight was that blue, holy crap. But you know, most people dial it around, and I'm always curious when I see someone go like a little bit out of left field with it and go, okay, they're trying to make me think something. And I think what's really weird is with my particular background, when I was a teenager, I had experience doing stage lighting in theaters for plays. And the things with plays, you're trying to basically exaggerate everything possible. So you might actually go crazy with a blue light. You'll go crazy with your blocking. You'll go crazy because if you are 60 rows back in a theater, they have to read what's going on that stage. They don't have the ability to zoom in or have a close-up or anything like that. So in that world, we were always doing like wacky things with color, usually trying to really evoke some sort of mood based off of a color palette. So if it was a warmer, sunnier day, we would hit the stage with a warmer light that would make you almost feel like you're walking across a desert and dying. If it was an evening light, we would make it calmer, cooler, usually softer, because typically that's what you would want to experience in your own like home at night. You don't go to bed with a bright light shooting into your face.
Really?
Unless you're passing out or something like that. But yeah. There's actually a really famous painter, John Singer Sargent, who I think also studied Howard Pyle before him. I had a really wonderful conversation about 20 years ago with a matte painter named Craig Mullins, who still works in the industry today, about skin tones and color schemes and themes and making people feel things. And one of the things that Sargent was a painter of light. I mean, he just was beautiful, much like Storaro on a cinematography level. But one of the things that always shocked me was Sargent would famously say, like, it doesn't matter what color the skin is, because like you might want a scene to have a very strong green color to evoke a very specific feeling. But then it's more about tonality and that contrast to break out what people need to be looking at. You have to direct the eye. And what you have as your tools are your control over lighting, your exposure method, and control over color in general. And that's it, you know. And also art department and stuff, you know, things like that can evolve. You know, I think Wes Anderson's probably the most profound filmmaker doing really interesting, very deliberate color schemes on films that will probably be around in 100 years and people look back at them as masterpieces. So.
One of the things as filmmakers is we generally learn from our mistakes. What are some mistakes that you guys have made over the years that have affected your learning curve in lighting? Denson.
Oh, sorry. Before we go there, Denson,
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a few questions lined up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, before we run out of time and nobody's questions got answered. So I got a question from Douglas Monroe. Welcome, Douglas, obviously. He would love to hear more real life experience from the folks who use the Titan X2 compared to that other manufacturer. It's so funny, and I'm sorry to speak a little bit up front here because I don't want to turn this into one big commercial. There's enough out there, but I think, you know, it hooks a little bit to what we were just talking about. You know, it's that other manufacturer or Ari or KinoFlow or light panels. I mean, they're still great lights. There's nothing wrong with those lights. They're amazing, and they've been doing it for many years. I think, you know, the big difference, what the X2 brings to the market, it's a little bit of a different way of thinking. And we try to do things in a different way, you know, in output and, like Phil said, in diffusion and in the entire workflow of the light. But that doesn't mean, you know, other lights are worse or better or whatever. I think it's just a different way of working, and it fits you or it doesn't fit you. It's like one of the two. It's not really like a better or worse kind of scenario. Is that the same that you guys experienced when you were using the X2?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, my first date with the light was a really interesting one, because as I was looking at what it could actually physically do in terms of just the control I have on the unit, I immediately thought, wow, the ramifications for tabletop and high speed work here is actually really alluring. Because if you have a big powerful light like this that you can dial to diffusion and shoot like maybe little small things like cans and stuff spinning around with like condensation spewing off of them, and you're able to dial the diffusion on the light, and you don't have to rig up something, and do it that way and start cutting your light a little bit, maybe too aggressively. For people who don't know, when you're shooting really high speed work, you're exploring these crazy shutter speeds. You might be, what might be considered a 180-degree shutter might be like 1/2000th of a second. So you need a lot of light. And that was my first impact. Yeah, but I mean, Dirk's known me for a while. I have over 120 lenses here, and the next thing I have the most of is lighting equipment. I don't even know how many different lights I have. It's literally one of the tools I can use to craft what I want, and I might pull a light out, or obviously what I do is I make kits that kind of all play well together. And generally speaking, what I think about is what do I have to deal with in terms of my subject matter, as well as general ambience, and also sort of like what I refer to as spotlighting, where you have to, if I was shooting in a kitchen, I might be using smaller units to kind of accentuate a corner or something like that to just carve out a shape, or maybe even a smaller flag somewhere to knock something back down. So really what I look for is like the hero lights that I'll use for, the fundamental thing is you want to have that one light that you can rely on, usually on a production, because the simple way of working is working backwards. But usually I set up in odds. So I'll do one hero light, and then it'll be like a 3-light kit, and then it'll be a 5-light kit, and then it goes on and so forth. And obviously if you have to light an entire street, you need a little bit more of that kit, and you got to rent everything out. But for my general uses, most of my lighting setups, especially for interiors, I can get away with, I can turn one light into a lot of different lights by bouncing and diffusing and doing a lot of things with it. But I mean, it's pretty rare for me to overly light a scene, because unless I'm trying to make something look super surreal, I'm actually usually trying to make people think that, oh, this person's actually in their home kitchen despite being in a sound stage, and those are fake plants outside. Yeah. I don't know if that answered everything. But...
Oh yeah. your experience comparing other lights that you've worked with.
Yeah, well, like I said before, like there's always different ways of doing the same thing, and what this does do is it puts a lot of the tools right there on the lamp, which is great. For me, I mean, I'll be honest, like as a DP, I'm not usually the one who's hands-on with the lighting equipment. I'd be having conversations with my gaffer, and the gaffer's the one who'll be making a lot of those choices, because those choices are often what's the quickest way we can achieve what the DP's asking for and get it happening fast. So I'd be curious to see, how gaffers feel about it. But I feel like my communication on set is generally talking about lighting positions, but it would also be about a little bit more, a little bit less, a little bit warmer, a little bit softer, a little bit cooler. And so my language is usually it's evolved into percentages. So if I want a little bit more light, I'm not always putting a meter there. I'd be looking and I'd say, well, can I get 10% more? Can I get 20% more? And the thing that I've often found is you're often asking for 10% more, and then eventually you get told, no, there's no more in it. And that's the beauty of this light, is it does have, you can turn it up to 11, a little bit more than some of those other lights, which is
Well, and it's super intuitive too. So you can throw the light on and never have used it before. And at first you're like, oh, and then once you actually touch the buttons, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. This is actually really easy to use, and I get it, which makes it a lot faster on set, which then helps that communication between you and your gaffer, and a lot simpler, which time and money is essential right now.
The X2 actually has quite a bit of output. I mean, it is powerful. I mean, that is something to note from it, no matter what. So
yeah, power and control.
Right, yeah.
Well, one more question actually from George Hupka. It's a long one though, so please bear with me. So I recently saw some interesting tests where LEDs were used on a 3200 and 5600 preset, and physical gels were used compared to dialing in the same gel electronically on the light. Physical gels seem to be much better on most lights tested. Yeah, I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
The conclusion was that manufacturers have generally done a good job of white, but there are differences in when it comes to gel emulation. Has the Titan been tested this way? Well, yes, actually it has been. So every color that's programmed in from Lee or Roscoe or Atlas or whatever gel it's actually in there, but I believe it's like 1,500 gels. So, but they've all been manually measured. So we know for a fact that it's for 99.9% accurate on the gel that you would be using. Of course, if you say, well, listen, I'm used to gels and I'm sticking to gels, it's fine. Everybody loves their C47s. I mean, what can I say? But it is what it is. But yeah, it's been all tested on every single gel in there, to much late nights and headaches and cursing from our engineer Rod.
Well, and I'm hearing feedback that the source matching that we have, the 50+ source matchings, is quite, the gaffers have been excited about, that have been using it, because it's exactly what they want. And so it's been good to hear that, and going in the source matching button, hitting what they want, or it's the tungsten or whatever it is. I'm finding that's been a good feedback as well, in addition to all the filters.
If I get in here on this one, I saw the test that was referenced, and this is really where the expanded technologies of having RGB WW plays a role. If you're looking at some other lights that are using other ways to get to an RGB light, you have difficulties filling up the spectrum in certain conditions. So when you think about using a gel, George referenced putting a pink gel on the fluorescent. So his ground truth light source was probably a fairly not full spectrum fluorescent tube to color correct and put a pink on. Now, if you put that on a full spectrum light, even if it's hitting the same color temperature, what you're going to get is slightly different. And that's something that's very hard for people to kind of like expand their minds around. In our motion picture industry, we have a few ground truths. I would say tungsten is sort of the golden standard when it comes to motion picture lighting. And then I still run into DPs who've been working for 40, 50 years who don't use anything else on set. Even with the LEDs, it's just tungsten, and then they tune it from there. But at the same time, we've had the evolution of HMI obviously becoming quite popular, which is not a perfect or stable source in terms of color temperature. And it's just one of these things where really what for me is I'm looking at, can the light produce full spectrum color, and what can I do to tune it from there? Whether I'm using gels or the built-in RGB features, matching sources and stuff. And what you guys have done here in terms of that sort of thing is really cool, because if I am working on a location and we can put incandescent bulbs and say lamps and stuff, I can make everything play really nicely and still have maybe a reddish fabric pick up as warm instead of getting zoned out by sort of a monochromatic color effect. And I like that.
All right. So, Phil, also a question from you from Ernie Kessler. In terms of hero lights mentioned by Phil, What is your hero light and why did you choose it?
Depends on the shot, the scene, you name it. I did a Zoom interview recently, and I showed something I shot for a cinematic for a video game that was set in a post-apocalyptic world. And the key light for that inside this bunker with like these radios that were powered by like crappy batteries and stuff like that, my key light was quite literally a flashlight shined through a milk jug as diffusion. Because it's a post-apocalyptic world, and like I don't want anything looking like it's overtly lit, because you wouldn't have beauty lighting in that situation.
The right tool for the right job.
Yeah. Generally speaking, if it's a commercial project, I tend to go with flexibility. And I think that's actually where some of these newer lights are kind of expressing their power, because you can show up with something like this in, like right now, I think I have it at 8% behind me, you know, and I in my testing, I mean, I've tested it at 100 and whatnot, but like, typically I'm not maxing out a light very often. I want to actually have some flexibility, as Denson was referencing. Like, I want to be able to reach over to my ensign and go, give her more power, and like them saying, I'm giving them all I got and all that. And you don't want that. You want to get that little bit of extra juice if you can get there. So,
Right.
Yeah, I think people are really attracted to the concept and the speed and time saving. Like, having a light that you can dial the color into saves people time, you know, with some knife and tape and, you know, clip in and whatever you want to do. You can just dial it in, and you can dial it in a way that a lot of people are not familiar with. Like, if you're using like a quarter straw on a light and you want to tune that, what do you do? You know, what filter do you add to kind of tune that further? I've done crazy things where I've bounced like red into a diffusion panel off of a surface to warm up a light. So now you're actually adding to the radiance and that sort of concept. But it's actually a term called radiosity in the VFX world for anyone, you know, on that side of things. But the reality is I can just walk over to this light and just dial it up a little bit. And that's very convenient. It's, you know, little turn of the knob or whatever. Or you can do it on an app, I guess. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, it was actually quite, what you're talking about that. We were talking to Oliver, who's the gaffer on Arrow in Vancouver. And, you know, we were at Pacific Backlot and, you know, we were demonstrating the light, and then he goes like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. And you just put it at like 10% because, you know, that's it. We just need to know what it does in like 10 to 20%. And yeah, we don't care about anything else. But yeah, actually, Ernie asked the same question also to Denson and George. So what is your hero light and why did you choose it, Denson?
Yeah, I mean, well, similarly, it depends on the on what the subject is. I mean, I do like I've just done 2 TV series back to back, and so my decision has been based on what's quick to work with and to move around. So I found quite often I'm using a 2x1 LED and putting in a DOP choice 5-foot octo is my favorite, with you know, with the grid on the front, on some wheels, so it's quick to move around, and that I can throw in some extra diffusion in front if we go super softer, or when we do the close up, put another frame in there. But it's just, that's a soft light, which I mean, I would love to be able to do a book light or do something of nice big bounce. That would be fantastic, but can take a little bit longer, or if you just need to move it a foot, it's going to just take too long. So to have a nice soft source that's maneuverable and it's sort of you know, quite a narrow profile is such a great universal light. And then just to be able to dial it up a little bit warmer, cooler, or you know, make those very quick changes is brilliant. So yeah, I'd say a 2x1 LED through a DOP choice 5-foot octo. That's my favorite right now.
How about you, George?
I go back to my beginnings, and the only soft lights we had were the big soft light scoops, which were very soft, or we had fluorescents, which were not very good in terms of color correction or color temperature. But I think if I was to take this literally, I would probably go with a 1K or a 2K Fresnel, and I'll tell you why. The Fresnel, for me, I've always liked hard light that I can manipulate. I think hard light is also a lot more difficult to use than a generic soft light, just because of its inherent qualities. It's like a bounce light. It's like north light. It's very different to southern exposure. So if I was to travel around somewhere, I would like to have a light that has a Fresnel, that if I suddenly wanted to make something more dramatic, or I wanted a shaft of light through some smoke or some atmosphere, I could do that. But by the same token, throwing a little bit of diffusion up, and it could be anything from tracing paper to a bounce, will give me that inherent soft look that I'm looking for. And I can still grade that. One of the silly things we do when we go to these Imago events, everybody's got a cell phone, obviously. And then you get a couple of DPs sitting around having some fun. And what we would do, we would light somebody with our cell phones. Literally, we would have a backlight, and then we'd take a paper napkin off the table, and we'd put that through. There was our diffusion, and we'd double it up. And it sounds silly, but what it really does is it confirms the understanding of how you can change a mood, not necessarily, I'm ignoring color for a moment, but just by contrast and by the way you use that contrast. It's the light against dark and vice versa. So that for me would be my favorite little light. But in terms of practicality, I think the other way to go is to get yourself a soft light, like a Kino or fluorescent corrected. These new quasars are always around. So again, for me, it's what you envisage you want to achieve, and then you apply the lighting to it. And if I was to look at some kind of creativity, and I said, well, there's no way I could go with any soft light, this has got to be an exercise in hard lighting, I would then go with Fresnel's, no question.
All right, well, we're
Can I
coming
jump
on
in
to
there
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
add something into that. This is actually really fascinating in relationship to the Titan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Weird synergy here. I'm probably a generation or two away from George's generation, but
I think we all are.
well, but fundamentally, early on, the Fresnel was the golden standard for me. The 1Ks and the 2Ks primarily, but the bigger lights as well. And the control over being a spot through flooded existence was so flexible, and still is. But one of the things that I always did on a personal level was I was always interested in taking that technology and shooting it into a fabric. Yeah. So what you could do is you get a different type of light when you shoot a spot into a diffusion frame, obviously. If you guys can visualize like the vignette of a lens, it's kind of what's happening with the diffusion frame shooting onto a scene, right? But when you can dial it into with a flood, it's very interesting. So one of my curiosities with the smart soft on the light, you know, this is not a yoke moving forward to in interacting with a Fresnel to affect the spread, but what you are doing is diffusing and affecting the light intensity. So it's somewhat similar. It's definitely a new visual language between going to a fairly hard source from the get-go versus a soft source. I actually like that. It's the first time I've seen a diffusion panel style light kind of go that route, all in one unit. And it's not quite a Fresnel, but Fresnels already exist, so you don't necessarily need to be a Fresnel, right? So,
yeah.
It's a huge
same
advantage.
Logic, though. Same logic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming on to an hour, so we don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to ask each one of you either a mistake that you've overcome and learned from greatly in addition to the advantages you see with the Titan, or a really cool, memorable story on set that you have. And I would like to kind of close out on how you see this Titan in the future on your sets and your productions. Denson?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a cool, memorable story, but I think one that would be relevant to the light. I did have a scene where I needed to. I had two actors in the shade of a door frame. We wanted to shoot it at golden hour. The director had a vision for it being this beautiful shot where you could see the rolling hills and the light in the sky diminishing. But obviously, putting those actors in that foreground, they're going to be in shadow. And we knew that we're only going to get sort of one take that's going to be balanced with our lighting setup. So we needed to be able to change our lighting setup with each take. And so I lit it with LEDs, and just with had the 2 camera operators on the setup, and I was just there with my color temperature meter reading the actual light of what was happening in the sky and what was happening from the bounce, and just so I could match what was happening there, and just making judgment calls as just what looked a nice balance. But to be able to have that ability to make a change where the director went in to have a conversation with the actors, and in that time I took 2 meter readings, told my gaffer what I wanted, he could make that change, and I could just on a radio, 10% less, and just keep bringing it down, and just found this beautiful lighting balance that we were making lighting changes as the light was changing, as the scene was progressing, and it just looked absolutely beautiful. And there's not a lot of other ways that you can really do that and do that quickly. I thought that was quite a nice story about working with them.
Awesome. Phil.
Trying to think of a mistake I've made, but I can tell
Oh,
you.
come on, you made so many.
No, I don't mean it that way, because I think honestly the journey of a experienced filmmaker is having a level of preparedness.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to a commercial I shot with Pfizer back in 2012, where it was a smaller production. Generally speaking, we were shooting at the Long Beach Aquarium in California here. And the concept for the shoot was to have those beautiful light rays hitting the talent to give that sort of, dancing water effect. And I had to sell production, mainly the producer and the director, on the concept of using a gobo with rotating discs to get that effect, because it was the smallest unit we could put into the aquarium without disturbing the environment, basically. If this was a bigger set, we could do a thing of water and all sorts of stuff. But what happened, we didn't have a lot of money to rent a lot of different lights, but we found one of these units and so on. But the bloody thing died on set. It failed. Our hero light failed. So suddenly the effect that we want is no longer available. So my backup plan wasn't really there, but what I ended up doing was taking a hard light, and I ripped my first AC off of camera, and I said, yo, I need you to use this foil and move it around in front of the light. And honestly, it looked better than what we got with the gobo situation. It was really good. And what we did was, cut up a few little pieces of gel, so there was a little bit of color to it and all that. And I mean, I had an agency there. The director was like, what's going on? You just have someone doing this? And yeah, we had a light fail on set, and the backup plan is to think outside the box. In this case, awesome. It was cut something up and use it. So.
Wow. And George, how about you?
I think if there's anything that I always think about in terms of mistakes and what have you, is whenever you make a mistake on set, is not to let anyone know about it. And I've always coined this phrase, never let them see your sweat, because that brings up the next question, what's wrong? But a very quick memorable one, I used to do a lot of underwater filming, and we were working on the title sequence for a feature, which was with kids and then underwater stuff. And we were doing some effect shooting as well on a crane and all kinds of stuff. And the light was like a yo-yo. It was sunny and then diffused and sunny. And we needed the sunny for underwater. And then as soon as it got diffused, the clouds, they called me out of the water and they said, come on. And I had to get back onto the wheels on the camera, and with my gear on and the tanks and everything, because the sun would only be in the cloud for maybe 2 minutes to get that. Then, the sun's coming out, back in the water again and shoot with the underwater camera. So it's this organic thinking that we have. And as Phil has just said, when something goes down, something goes wrong, the best part, I think, of our filmmaking industry is that you think on your feet, you think outside the box, but you never let them see you sweat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, the Titan does think outside the box with the smart soft diffusion, the variable diffusion, the 1500 filters, the HSI, my favorite is the XY. I love having, going in and setting Rec 709 or Rec 2020 or even full gamut. That is just, wow, this is amazing. And the intuitiveness of it. And, let's close out with, how do you see this in the future on your particular sets? Phil?
Oh, me. Okay. I mean, I've been definitely an advocate of LED lighting for a while. And for me, I think the best part about right now is I don't have to like fight with production to convince them that we're going with LED anymore. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, cool. Did you test it? Does it look good? And usually I have some frames and stuff I can show people to give them sort of that exuded confidence if they really need it. But, you know, I think the power benefits of LED have become glaringly obvious. I mean, I did a VR shoot with a whole bunch of LED lights, and we ran off of house power, and it was, I mean, we lit a 60-foot set, and normally that would be a big generator for that situation. And, you know, I think that advantage is happening. I think the lights are getting smarter. You know, the job of a gaffer suddenly is now not having like a grotesque knowledge of necessarily filtration and being good with a blade and tape and a frame. But now you're actually using iPads and phones, and, you know, the job is changing. And, you know, it's, you know, our industry is arts and sciences, right? And this is technology evolving, and we have to look at how to use these tools to get the shots we want. And, you know, like, if that's just bringing, you know, the Titan on set and just setting it to 5,600 Kelvin and looking for a daylight source, happy days, it's done a job. But if it's something where you have to dial it a little bit, be a little bit more flexible, craft the shape of the light and things like that, and being able to do that all in one unit, I think that's pretty empowering. And I think people really do like that control, because it does save time, actual time on set, when you're, you know, if you have 15 lights set up and you have to change gels, that's a very different commitment than dialing that in on a tablet. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So, Denson, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's a very versatile light, and I can see a lot of uses that I'd be wanting to put it to on a set. I think one of the things that I've seen and had to do on a number of the shows I've done recently is we would use the same set, but want to have a day mode, a dawn mode, a night mode. And if that is changing gels, then that is taking time. If it is changing your programming, it can be in an instant. So I think that's very handy. But the thing that's always come up is that you can't always afford to have the exact lighting package you want. You're going to have to, it's going to be a balance of doing what you need with and suiting the budget that the project has. So I think we're now getting to a point where we're getting closer together where we can afford to have that technology, and in places where it's often a little bit too expensive to have that choice. And I think, like, for me, I just love to be able to have that pre-light time and have that play time and set those presets and do some of that lighting together with a gaffer. And I think that I'm not the guy who's telling a gaffer what tools to use. I'm more the approach of, this is the aesthetic, this is what we're going for, and, you know, wanting to hear the advice and thoughts of a gaffer as to what's the best application and what's the best tool to apply. And I think, you know, gaffers are going to love this light, I would think. And once you got to get it in their hands, I don't see why not. And
George, your final thoughts?
I think this particular light is quite remarkable in its versatility capabilities, and I would love to be able to get a light like this into the classroom. And I think for the first time, without cutting up gels and many rolls of different kinds of gels, quarter, half, full, etc., by using this facility of dialing in and explaining the color theory, by explaining color temperatures and all of the other points that this light can make, the diffusion, the variable diffusion alone, I think this would be a really invaluable tool, not only from a time standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint, where universities can't afford for you to cut out 15 rolls of gel to, you know, tell them what the difference of red and the blue and the pink is. But having the ability to change, but I preface, but with the instruction, this is not just another LED light that's got a lot of power. Here's how you use it to its full advantage. And this is how you understand a way to use it. I think this could be an amazing teaching tool.
Wow, fantastic. You guys, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your insight and your your experience with us. I've learned a lot. I know, Dirk. Thank you again. And we will get this on YouTube for the recording. And I look forward to working with you guys in the future. And again, thank you for coming on board with us today and sharing your knowledge. It's very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Very, very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having
Pleasure.
us, and good
Yeah.
to meet all of you. It was actually quite fun. So.
Awesome. Actually, I hope so.
If Phil says it's quite fun, it's actually been a blast. To read between those lines.
Well, have a good rest of your day or night or wherever in the world you are, and look forward to our next Rotolight Hangout. Thanks.
I'll do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.